Hello, comrades, and welcome back to Ushanka Show. Здравствуйте, дорогие товарищи! В эфире программа Ushanka Show. And welcome back to another episode number 25 of my review of Robert Robertson's book, Black on Red, My 44 Years Inside the Soviet Union. And thank you everyone who is following this long book review marathon. We have about 100 pages left, so we're almost there. And just in case if you're new to my channel, I will post the link below in the comment section to the playlist that has all the videos about this book, Black on Red by Robert Robertson. So now we are in the year 1965, which means that Nikita Khrushchev was removed from power a year ago in 1964, and now the Soviet Union has the new leader, Leonid Brezhnev. And I'm surprised that Robert Robertson didn't mention anything about the events of replacing Nikita Khrushchev with Leonid Brezhnev. There was a peaceful transfer of power. Usually someone needs to die in the Soviet Union in order for the new leader, but he has plenty of his own problems, so nothing again in the book about Nikita Khrushchev removal. I would like to remind you that Robert Robertson arrived to the Soviet Union on a one-year contract back in 1930, so now he is spending the 35th year of vacation in a foreign land, and he had already 27 failed attempts to obtain exit visa so he can leave the country for a vacation because he is desperately trying to escape Soviet Union. And of course, Comrade Robertson knew better by now not to tell anyone the real reason behind his attempts to get the visa. He writes, "I was watched all the time. My incoming and outgoing mail was open and read. Numerous neighbors were informing on me, yet still my record was spotless. The secret police, KGB, so now they renamed NKVD into KGB after death of Stalin, could know whatever it pleased about me, and when I went to bed, who my friends were, what I did and said at work, what I ate, and which shoe I put on first. But I made certain they did not know my fundamental secret. Nobody in Russia, no friend however close, and especially not the secret police, could know that I yearned to get out. At least until 1965, that is what I thought." Which reminds me, I have a video on the topic about Soviet people being afraid of the KGB. A long time ago, someone asked me that question. So as a nagruzka, you remember what nagruzka is? I will add that old video at the end of this video. So if you want to watch it or rewatch it again, it will be following this book review. My secret became exposed as a result of an attempt I made to get out through the President Sekou Touré of Guinea. Pravda ran a long article about the newly independent Republic of Guinea and mentioned that the president of this African nation would soon visit Moscow. I thought about this article for a couple of days, and I hoped that, although I was not being allowed to visit the United States or Jamaica, maybe I could obtain an invitation to Guinea. I knew I could be useful to them. I was still fluent in French, could teach mechanical engineering to students, and could help the nation in other ways to industrialize. I wrote a letter to Touré offering my services. Now the only trick was getting it to him. Obviously, I could not mail the letter. And I find it interesting here that 35 years in the Soviet Union taught Comrade Robertson some valuable lessons. So he basically decided, I cannot mail the letter, so I need to hand it to him personally. And he failed by himself. He couldn't get close, and then one of his friends tried to give the letter, and same, he said, I couldn't. There were too many KGB agents surrounding the president. Here comes the interesting part. So he said, I thanked my friend for trying and assured him that I understood the problem and appreciated his efforts to help me. I returned home, opened my wardrobe trunk, and placed the sealed letter in the upper drawer. I locked all 4 drawers, shut the trunk, and locked it. Here comes the interesting part. When I learned 2 years later that President Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana was going to visit Moscow soon, I decided to attempt the same strategy with him as I did before with Touré. Rather than write a new letter from scratch, I figured I could copy what I had written earlier. I went to upper drawer of my trunk, but the letter was missing. I had seen it just 2 weeks earlier when I was getting something else out of the trunk. Where could it be? So anyway, he searched everywhere and letter was gone. In a locked drawer, in a locked trunk, in a locked apartment. And he had no idea what happened. Okay, so back to his story. So my enlightenment came in 1965 while I was at Zavidova Home of Rest. So that's places when workers can go and take a break over the weekend or for their vacation. About 95 miles from Moscow. One evening while I was watching couples dancing, a rather plump woman who seemed to be in her mid-40s said to me, "Comrade, I have noticed that you are always by yourself. Why don't you dance? I'm sure you are an excellent dancer, am I right?" The next day after lunch, the same woman approached me again and asked if I had any plans. So they went together for a walk, so sounds like a little romance going on. And she introduced herself. She was clearly from educated, sophisticated background. And she told him that her husband, who was also a party member, and she was a party member, disappeared in 1952. That's interesting. It's just husband had disappeared. Not being arrested, just one day he went to work and never came back, and the government couldn't explain what happened. So it's 1952, I think it's still when Comrade Stalin was alive. After a while she turned to look at me with sad eyes and asked, "I wonder if you could be trusted. You see, you are the first foreigner I have met on such a simple and friendly level. Most foreigners I meet are big shots in their country, and I deal with them on official business." Once again, there's an interesting part coming up right now. Immediately my guard went up. I wondered if she was a KGB agent trying to trap me. After all, the entire initiative in our relationship had been from her. I answered cautiously, "I don't know what you have in mind about trusting me. I just feel you are the kind of person who will listen to my concerns," she said. The sentence about immediately my guard went up made me chuckle because I don't know if you read my book, American Diaries 1995. I had a similar experience in America because Americans just seem to be way too friendly. So I was always like concerned that they have something, there's a reason why they're so nice to me. They want something from me, so it's like, why they just invite me for dinner? I don't know them, I just met them, or they just tell, "Oh, if you need something, just give us a call, we'll take you shopping, or we'll take you to Niagara Falls." That was really bizarre experience. So I kind of see, so now Robert Robertson is a real Soviet citizen. He's really, right away, his guard went up when somebody asking these questions, "Can I trust you?" Blah, blah, blah. Okay, now back to black and red. So this lady said, "I have been a communist for over 25 years. I have made many sacrifices, as did my husband before he disappeared. But I don't see any rewards. Since the 20th Party Congress in 1956, I find I no longer am able to hold the ideals of party sacred." So that's the Congress when Khrushchev denounced Stalin. "Many of my friends feel the same way, gloomy, distrustful, and convinced that our system has deceived us. We think there will never be any real communism in our country." So anyway, during their conversation, Robert Robertson asked the lady, "Why do you think they treat you with suspicion?" And she replied, "Well, for your information, suppose for the last 4 years, while you were away on vacation, your room was opened and explored for documents that would incriminate you as someone disloyal to the Soviet Union. Suppose that those documents were taken and photographed and later returned, but in such a way that it was obvious to you that someone had been snooping around in your personal things. If that happened to you, wouldn't you feel disgusted with and outraged by the system?" Before we continue, I want to point something out. Did you notice she said your room was opened, not your apartment, which means the lady, being a pretty big deal party member, and her husband, they live in the room, which means they live in a communal apartment. Okay, and here comes Robert Robertson revelation. Oh my God, I thought. My missing letter to President Tory. How stupid of me not to realize. It is probably in the hands of KGB. This means they know my secret. They know I'm trying to get out. Now I could understand without a doubt why officials in my factory had instituted a new policy about 3 years earlier of keeping me away from all foreign visitors. They were afraid that I would develop a link with an outsider, someone who might be able to help me break loose from the Soviet embrace. Several years later, upon returning from another vacation trip, I discovered that some other precious documents were missing. They were never returned. Clearly, the KGB was sending a locksmith to my room, so he has a room too, not an apartment, who was able to open the American combination padlock on the outside of my trunk and look carefully through my belongings for anything that might be interesting. The secret police was even more present from the mid-60s on than they had been in recent years as a result of Leonid Brezhnev succeeding the ousted Khrushchev as a general secretary of the Communist Party in October 1964. Khrushchev had not been as repressive as Stalin, but Brezhnev turned out to be worse than Khrushchev, I'm surprised to learn that, and more sophisticated than Stalin. Soon after he gained power, Brezhnev reinstated a 19th century Russian practice of declaring mentally unfit and incarcerating those people who would dare to speak against the regime. I soon learned that nobody liked Brezhnev, not even in the party. He was a binge drinker, and it was said that at times he completely lost his mind and did not know what he was doing. I had every reason to consider myself in as much or more danger than I had ever been. Okay, so this concludes episode number 25, my book review of Black on Red by Robert Robinson, and we just finished part 3. Next part, it will be part 4, Brezhnev to Gorbachev, and Robertson still stuck in the Soviet Union. Okay, my friends, all I have for you today. Thank you again for watching Ushanka Show. Please don't forget to like the video and post a comment. As I mentioned earlier, right now you can watch my older video on the topic of Soviet Union being afraid of KGB. Thank you so much. До свидания. Goodbye. And if you're new to this channel, my name is Sergey, and I was born in the USSR. Меня зовут Сергей, я родился в Советском Союзе. In today's video, I'm gonna try to answer one of the popular questions that always popped during my live show. Was I afraid of KGB or my family? Anybody I know were afraid of KGB watching or listening? Long time ago, I already recorded a video on the KGB topic. It's called KGB Also Makes Mistakes. By the way, what is KGB? Where I told a story when I met some American millennials at my place of work, and I was so shocked and, to be truthful, disappointed when I discovered they had no idea what KGB was. And the reason why they asked me that question, because my hard hat has a sticker that says Sergey KGB. Well, if you want to impress your Russian friends, you don't say KGB, you say КГБ, Комитет государственной безопасности, Department of State Security. And although Soviet Union had state security from 1917, fun fact, KGB was created on March 13, 1954, about 1 year exactly after the death of Stalin. But of course, KGB wasn't created in 1954, it was just renamed. Prior it was called NKGB, NKVD, OGPU, GPU, and VCK. But what's very interesting that right after the death of Joseph Stalin in 1953, in 3 years, between 1953 and 1955, the amount of people working at state security was reduced by 52%. And now back to the original question, was I or my family ever afraid of the KGB, Комитет государственной безопасности? And the answer would be no, нет, not really. In my youth, so we're talking early 80s, There was no concern about KGB whatsoever. I mean, we had a lot of jokes about KGB listening to everyone, knowing everything, but in reality, there was no really concern, like there's ever my mouth would say anything like, hey, you better watch your mouth because KGB is listening. But we had a really good jokes. So here's one for you. So at some party, a guy talking to another guy was having a drink, and he's like, hey, by the way, who do you work for? KGB. Oh, really? That's interesting. You got any good stories? You want stories about you or stories about my work? Here's another KGB joke for you guys. That happens in Ukraine. So Ukrainian person gets called into KGB office for the questioning, and they asking him like, we noticed you regularly receive presents and parcels coming from Israel. What's up with that? And Ukrainian guy explains that during the war, he was hiding a couple of Jewish people in his basement. So as a thank you, now they send him food and presents. So KGB officer is asking, as a Soviet citizen, aren't you ashamed to get stuff from the Jews? You should be ashamed of yourself and you should think about your future. And Ukrainian guy answers, well, actually I do think about my future. What do you mean? Currently, I'm hiding a Chinese guy in my basement. And now back to our question. You probably know that KGB was pretty much an equivalent of American CIA and FBI combined. So KGB did both. They worked overseas and they worked inside of the Soviet Union. And having behind its belt over 50 years experience dealing with enemies, foreign and domestic, KGB knew pretty well what kind of people, what kind of layers of population can cause troubles inside of the USSR. So KGB heavily penetrated universities, colleges, theaters. So pretty much they were watching Soviet intelligentsia. They didn't care about blue-collar workers because those guys, they couldn't see through the smoke and mirrors, right? But now people of the higher education, they saw bigger picture and they could cause troubles. People like Andrei Sakharov, a Soviet nuclear physicist who became activist for disarmament, peace, and human rights. He was a designer of the Soviet thermonuclear weapon, but as a result of his activism, he got in trouble with KGB. People like Vasily Stus, who was Ukrainian poet, translator, and journalist, and active member of Ukrainian dissident movement. His works were banned by Soviet regime. He was arrested and spent 13 years in detention until his death in a Soviet forced labor camp back in 1980s. When Vasily Stus was arrested in May of 1980 and received 10-year sentence for anti-Soviet activity. So during that trial, his defense lawyer, which was assigned to him, in the closing speech, he actually stated that, yes, Stus deserved punishment. And so in this case, all these jokes about Soviet Russia, lawyer doesn't defend you. That's what exactly happened. Your lawyer thinks that you are guilty. Fun fact, that lawyer, Viktor Medvedchuk, became a successful Ukrainian politician, lawyer, and business oligarch. He is a personal friend of Russian President Vladimir Putin, and Putin is the godfather of Medvedchuk's daughter Darina, who was born in 2004. But of course, there is no doubt that the KGB was very scary when it was called NKVD in 1930s. And especially during so-called Great Terror of 1937, 38, and 39, when I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of people were arrested, jailed, sent to labor camp, or just shot for being enemy of the people, spies of all kind of different countries. So those were horrible times, and that's when NKVD was really horrifying pretty much everyone. My personal experience dealing with KGB was kind of funny. I actually have an article I wrote about that event, And it was published in a local newspaper in Kiev in the late 80s, in a newspaper called Вечерний Kiev, Evening Kiev. So what happened that day, we were on a walk with my buddy, taking pictures. And we were walking Vladimirskaya Street. That's what is a giant building of KGB of Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, which in Ukrainian it's KDB, Комітет Державної безпеки. So I thought it'd be kind of cool to have a picture like I'm, standing my face into the wall with my hands behind my back, and the sign above says KGB of Ukraine. But they didn't let us take that picture. Suddenly, there's out of nowhere, a guy showed up and he's like, "You're not allowed to take pictures. You better go." So I got upset and I actually wrote the article called Shpigunomania, Spy Mania. Still, like, for how long we're going to have such a silly limitations, like you can't take a picture by the sign that says KGB of Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. Well, my friends, that's all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed this video and we'll talk to you soon. До свидания. Goodbye.